Final Fantasy XV was in development for 10 years before its release, and this is what we get. For a AAA title from a renowned developer, it's really difficult to excuse the number of mistakes Square Enix made. To start, combat's overly simplistic. You hold one button. That's right, one button does all the attacking for you. Honestly, it does work pretty well, but it's pretty boring. Sadly, combat doesn't really even manage to add much depth with its other features. You have a warp skill to move around quickly, blocking is done by holding one button down while it dodges enemy attacks automatically, and the occasional button prompt appears for medium damage attacks. Outside of that, you can tell your allies to use a few select abilities, activate a special barrage of attacks called the Armiger, and use summons whenever the game feels like randomly allowing you to. The game also has a cover system where you can recover health and MP, but I rarely found a use for it, so I'm curious why they bothered to implement it in the first place. However, the biggest issue with the combat is the bad camera angles that force you into holding the attack and block buttons while hoping everything works out just fine. It makes me wonder why Square Enix didn't bother to implement transparency for bushes and other environments that get in the way, since this is a feature that's seen in many lower budget titles. Sadly, the AI is also pretty bad, often getting hit by attacks and providing little to combat. There were many times where I would just leave my allies dead in battle since it rarely felt worth it to revive them with my Phoenix Downs. Combat difficulty is a pretty strange thing too, since a lot of lower level enemy groups are significantly harder than a single high level enemy. For example, level 34 Curls that have an instant kill attack also do high damage and have absurd health for their level. Fighting them seems to drag on, it feels like a chore to complete, but this isn't an isolated event either, especially for those who bother to fight some of the optional endgame enemies. Even with all I've said, the combat is still passable. Sadly, the exploration aspect of the game has many downsides. Side quests, for example, are all mundane fetch quests with no depth or story added. They all boil down to accepting a quest from the quest giver, running to a location and killing enemies or searching for objects, then returning to the quest giver again for a minimal EXP reward. What's disappointing is that these characters feel like they were supposed to be likable, but end up being very one-dimensional stereotypes. Dave has you find dog tags of dead soldiers, Vive works for a magazine and has you take pictures, and the professor asks you to find frogs for her. There's a lot of other characters like this too, but it really would have been nice to see some real interactions with them instead of these sad, mere 2 lines of dialogue you get at each encounter. While exploring the world, you also come across many inexplicable invisible walls. I often found myself trying to jump down from an edge to a point where I needed to be only to be blocked by an invisible wall. Considering the options to mitigate fall damage and the number of jumps that wouldn't even hurt your party, baffles me why these even exist. In terms of the open world, it's pretty boring, there's not a whole lot to do. There are a few fishing spots, but since fishing is also boring and provides you with no reasonable rewards, it felt like it was just crossing off a checkbox. The open world could be a little better if there was at least some decent loot to find, but since most weapons and accessories are tied to story events or shops, it makes exploring for gear pointless. It's also important to note that fast travel with the car is disabled for the first half of the game, which makes traversing the barren wasteland even more annoying. There are other qualms with exploration like chocobos randomly being unable to sprint, but there would be simply too many for me to list. From time to time, Final Fantasy XV also likes to interrupt your gameplay with lengthy pauses that could have easily been sped up or kept the game running. For example, whenever Ignis learns a new cooking recipe, the game feels the need to zoom in on his face for 5 seconds while he tells everyone he's come up with a new recipe, despite the fact the game already explains the recipe information in a prompt on the side of the screen. In addition, the game has dialogue decisions, but these can last up to half a minute when all you want to do is respond to one question and move on. Frustratingly, these are mostly repeated questions such as every night when a character bugs you to stop driving and pull over for the night, or notifies you that it will be dangerous to drive. With the jump button mapped to the same button as the interact button, the number of accidental interactions grows exponentially. A mere jump to increase movement speed in towns when you can't run sometimes turns into a 5-second examination of the cosmology book you've read a million times. Although 5 seconds doesn't sound like much, the number of times these things happen add up and do add to the player's frustration with the game. For all that has been said up to this point, I would be willing to excuse it if the story were phenomenal. While I will admit I did enjoy the second half and the controversial ending, overall the game leaves too many things unexplained and the entire first part is directionless. Final Fantasy XV's story suffers from being too ambitious without bothering to focus on any of it. Not only does the game leave out significant information because it assumes you have watched the movie and anime tie-ins Kingsglaive and Brotherhood, far too many important events including character deaths occur off-screen. Fortunately, the dynamics between the 4 main characters is interesting and makes for some fun conversations, but like I said, without watching Brotherhood there is no explanation why they are friends or who they are, as their backstories are never revealed in-game. Some people may argue that other media does the same thing where important information is only accessible with spin-off movies and so forth, but that's not an excuse, more so as it is a problem with modern media. Regardless, I did enjoy my time with Final Fantasy XV. Yes, I had a lot of complaints with it, but I still bothered to play it through and get the Platinum Trophy, even if there were a lot of moments I didn't enjoy. As a whole, I did enjoy 13 more, but if you're a fan of the Final Fantasy series, I think you should at least give it a shot. Just be prepared for a lot of terrible game design issues and an average story. Sadly, for how big of a budget this game had, it really is a missed opportunity with all of its mistakes. Many of these probably would have been overlooked if it released 5 years ago during the open world craze, but recent competing games completely outshine it. Anyways, that's all I have to say, everybody. Thanks for watching.